Welcome to the Knowing What Counts podcast, the place where expert guidance meets smart financial decisions. Whether you're a high net worth individual or a thriving business, the experts at MP CPAs are here to help you protect and optimize your wealth. Let's get started, because success begins with knowing what counts.
Stock compensation can be a game changer for employees, but it's not always as straightforward as it seems. Tax manager Matt Baran explains how to make the most of your shares while sidestepping tax traps and potential pitfalls. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Sophia Yvette, co-host / producer, back in the studio with Baran, tax manager at MP CPAs. So, Matt, how's it going?
Great. How are you, Sophia?
I'm great. So, Matt, what is equity compensation and what are the benefits to companies and employees alike?
So equity compensation is when a company provides stock in exchange for either services or capital. So generally, it's another form of compensation in addition to your salary or bonus or things like that.
So, Matt, what are the most common types of stock compensation?
The most common types of stock compensation are stock options. So those are incentive stock options, also called ISOs. There's non-qualified stock options, also called NSOs. And then there's RSUs, which are restricted stock units. And there's also employee stock purchase plans, which we'll touch on all of those a little bit today.
What about some key dates regarding stock compensation?
Yep. So some key dates are the grant date, which is when the employee is granted a right to either purchase the shares or to receive the shares. So in the case of options, the grant date is when they receive the right to purchase. If for RSUs, it's when they receive the right to receive the share sometime down the road. There's also the vesting date, which is when the employee actually receives the shares. In terms of the restricted stock units, there will be a vesting schedule spread out over likely 5 years, and then they'll receive the shares evenly in a 5-year span. And then there's also an exercise date, which relates to stock options. So that's when you actually purchase the shares. So that's when you'll actually receive them.
What are stock options exactly and how do they work?
Yep. So stock options give employees a right to purchase shares at a given point in time and at a set price. So there's two types of stock options: incentive stock options and non-qualified stock options. So the taxation on those is a little bit different.
What is the biggest difference in the taxation on those?
Yeah. So incentive stock options are generally more beneficial for the employee. So they are, when they're exercised, there's what's called an AMT preference item. So they are subject to alternative minimum tax. However, that is reversible in a future year whenever you are not subject to alternative minimum tax. So that's kind of just a timing difference, but there is that tax aspect to it. And then once you exercise the shares, there's a holding period. So you have to hold the shares for 2 years from the grant date or 1 year from the exercise date in order to qualify for the capital gain tax raise. So generally speaking, that's why incentive stock options are most beneficial, because there is an upfront tax of the AMT, but down the road, as long as you hold it for that required period, you'll one, reverse the AMT tax, and then two, you'll get the capital gain. So if you do not reach the holding period requirements, that'll be taxed as ordinary income. That's called a disqualifying disposition. And then for non-qualified stock options, so those are taxed as ordinary rates when they are exercised. So the difference of the set price at the grant date versus the fair market value when you purchase the shares, that's called the spread. And you're taxed at ordinary rates on that spread. And then your holding period begins for the capital gain rates from there.
So, Matt, what are the RSUs and how are they different from stock options?
RSUs are when employees are granted stock over certain vesting periods. So that could either be a length of time or performance metrics that you need to hit. But so what makes them different from options are you actually receive the right to the shares themselves sometime down the road rather than just the right to purchase them. So RSUs are not typically, you're not paying any money out of pocket for them. And then those are taxed at ordinary rates, same as like your W-2 when you receive them. So it's taxed as the fair market value of the stock on the vesting date. And then from there, your holding period begins. And then if you reach that 1 year hurdle, then upon a sale, it becomes capital gains.
What about employee stock purchase plans? What are they and what are the tax implications?
Yep. So employee stock purchase plans allow employees to purchase stock at a discounted price. If your employees are offered the right to purchase shares at $10 when the fair market value is $12. So they still are paying that out of pocket costs. However, they are receiving a benefit of that discount. And then very similar to ISOs, they have the same holding periods. So you need to hold it for 2 years after the offer date and then 1 year after the actual purchase date. And then those will qualify for capital gains tax rates as well.
So, Matt, how does an 83B election fit in with all of this?
Yep. So 83B elections are probably most typical for startups. What they are it's an election to accelerate income from the entire vest of restricted stock awards, for example. You will be paid out over a vesting schedule, but you can make this 83B election in order to elect to accelerate all that income of the fair market value over the total vesting period into the current year. So that's why it's most typical with startups, because right when a company starts out, their fair market value of their stock is generally going to be zero or very little. So you can kind of take that hit of the ordinary income in the current period. And the benefit of that is two things. You don't get tax on the ordinary income as those vest over the years. And that also opens up the capital gain holding period as well for when you eventually sell the stock down the line. So whatever ordinary income you accelerate into the current year, that is your basis. Oftentimes it's zero. It could be whatever you pick up as income that year. And then sometime down the road, that's your basis when you sell the stock.
What about key considerations for employees managing their equity compensation? What are those key considerations?
There's definitely a few things to think about. Timing is probably the most important factor. Depending on which stock compensation you're receiving, the timing is going to vary. So like I mentioned, the incentive stock options, you want to be aware of that large tax bill that would come with the AMT preference item. You also, for all of them, you want to be aware of the holding periods so you are able to benefit from the long-term capital gain rate versus risking any disqualifying dispositions and being taxed at higher rates. You also want to consider any outside income that you might have. If you already typically have high ordinary income, whether that's from a spouse's job or another method, then you want to consider that when you're accelerating some income, like in the example of an 83B election, if there actually is income that you're accelerating into the current year, you want to consider that as well, because you don't want to be taxed at the highest rates possible. And then just, the various tax considerations of the ordinary versus capital gains. And then there's also the non-tax considerations of, do you believe in the long-term future of the company? Do you want to be kind of over-invested in it, or do you want to maybe diversify a little bit more? And that would also maybe lead you to sell some shares that you receive. So those are all things to consider. And as always, it's best to consult a tax advisor.
Well, Matt, we'll catch you in the next episode. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks for listening to the Knowing What Counts podcast. Ready to optimize your wealth and protect your future? Visit the mpgroupcpa.com or call 413-739-1800 to connect with our team of experts. Remember, success is about knowing what counts.